From American actors who became governors, the former later elected president, the latter known for the phrase,
"I'll be back."
to Chima and Chinua, two of Africa's most famous authors who, though not related, by some freaky coincidence, lived in the same house several years apart. And sadly, things did fall apart. To American T. Ribs and German M. Schumacher, Formula One aficionados, born on the same day. From America's first black ballerina to Robert Ballard. From Indian author, teacher of yoga, BKS Yenga, who reminds us that we are not getting any younger. To the drama in Bahama and the rumble in the jungle. A killer and a chiller and the thriller in Manila. To Malala and Lilibeth, the former whose son almost set in the SWAT district from an assassin's bullet, the latter Her Royal Majesty, whose empire the sun, it was said, never set. To the exquisite beauty of our expansive, expanding, and majestic universe. Whatever takes your fancy, there's something for everyone right here, right now. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Today in History for the 15th of January. My name is Sotonye Afiesimama. Let's get cracking as I share with you important events as recorded on this day in history. So, yesterday I did mention the fact that today I was going to talk about a famous American photographer who died virtually unknown. Also, two kings in quotes again, born on this day. An American airplane crash lands with 0 fatalities. Can you guess? All will be revealed in today's Today in History. First of all, we shall start with the British Museum pictured here, the beautiful British Museum. This is called the Grand Court. The British Museum opened on this day officially in 1759. It was established by an Act of Parliament in 1753. It counts among its world-renowned antiquities and archaeological holdings the Elgin Marbles and the Rosetta Stone. So this was the day that the British Museum opened to the public in 1759. It's a beautiful edifice. I've been here a few times, here for a job interview as well, believe it or not. When I was doing my master's in University of Edinburgh in History of Art and Architecture, the people who interviewed me here were actually those who I collected my research material from while I was doing my research in numismatics, history of numismatics. Anyway, so this is a British Museum which opened on this day in 1759. On this day in 1896, American photographer who I mentioned earlier, this was the guy who died virtually unknown and alone. His name is Mathew Brady, known for his portraits of politicians and images of the American Civil War. He died virtually forgotten in a hospital charity ward in New York City. How sad. Mathew Brady, born in 1896, known for his portraits of American politicians, images of the American Civil War, died alone and virtually forgotten in a hospital charity ward in New York City. Also born on this day, this is one of the kings, so kings in quotes. He was born in 1918 and his name is Gamal Abdel Nasser, president of Europe. So that's him pictured here, born on this day in 1918. Exactly 11 years later, This is the other king, again, in quotes. He wasn't a real king, but this is the guy here. His name is Martin Luther King Jr. Pardon me having to move this frame. This is Martin Luther King Jr., born on this day in 1929. He was an American religious leader and civil rights activist. Unfortunately, sadly, he was assassinated whilst a very young man in his early 40s, I believe. I think he was 42, or was it 39? Well, anyway, he was assassinated as a very young man, sadly, by those who were threatened by the cause that he was, by what he stood for, I guess, you know. And this quote, I really like this quote. That's why I chose this picture. It says, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Now, how true is that? How so painfully true? We don't usually remember the harsh words of our enemies. I mean, we expect that from our enemies, don't we? But when our friends keep quiet, keep silent when we're going through hell, we tend to remember those, those who we think love us, or those who are supposed to love us, So something to think about. Don't be remembered by your friends as a friend who failed to speak up when injustice was being meted towards you. You need to speak up when you see injustice anywhere. Okay, so again, Martin Luther King was born on this day in 1929. Just thought I'll show you one more picture of Martin Luther King. I have a dream. I don't know if you know about the speech, the I have a dream speech. If you haven't heard of it or you don't know about it, go check it out, Google it up, and find out what Martin Luther King said regarding this phrase, I have a dream. Right, so let's move on to the next important event that happened on this day in history. It's called Happy Days. For those of you who have not heard of Happy Days, where have you been? I mean, for the younger generation, totally understandable. If you're less than 35, 30 years old, perhaps, you would be excused for not knowing about Happy Days. But yeah, so Happy Days, the American television series, a nostalgic comedy set during the 1950s and 1960s, premiered on this day in 1974 on ABC. So American Broadcasting Corporation, I guess that's the meaning of ABC. I'm not American, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're American. So this was the day in 1974 that Happy Days premiered on American TV. It's a nostalgic comedy set during the 1950s and 1960s. I didn't even realize it was set in the 1950s and 1960s. I thought it was actually acted out during the 1950s and 60s. But anyway, pardon my ignorance for those of you who are screaming at your screens now. Oh, I can't believe you didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. But yeah, so Happy Days, very, very feel-good, comedy. Comedies are supposed to be feel-good anyway, but I really, really enjoyed watching Happy Days, Did make me happy. I'm sure it made millions and millions of people around the world happy as well, not just Americans. Okay, next on this day in 1981, El Hadji Ousseynou Diouf. I'm going to take that again. El Hadji Ousseynou Diouf, a Senegalese former professional footballer, was born. Throughout his career, Diouf played as a winger or a forward, having started his professional football career in France with Sochaux, Rennes and Lyon. Diouf finalized a move to Premier League side Liverpool prior to the 2002 FIFA World Cup for Senegal and went on to have a memorable tournament. So this is El Hadji Diouf, who was born on this day in 1981. Also, on this day, exactly 20 years later, which was exactly 20 years ago, 2001 was the year, and the day, of course, was January 15th. Wikipedia, a free internet-based encyclopedia that operates under an open source management style, made its debut and became a separate website of its own. It was founded by Jimmy Wales and Larry Sanger. Okay, so I'm going to take this information again. There's a slight difference from what I'm going to say next. So Wikipedia, a free internet-based encyclopedia that operates under an open source management style, debuted, and it became a separate website of its own. So this was the day it became a separate website of its own. It was founded by Jimmy Wales and Larry Sanger. Last but not least, yes, I did mention this at the outset as well. This was called Miracle on the Hudson. This was the day that this airplane, flight 1549, so US Airways flight 1549, piloted by Captain Chelsea Sullenberger, also called Sully III, lands in the Hudson River after the plane flew into a flock of Canada geese shortly after takeoff, resulting in severe damage to the plane's engines. There were no fatalities. Can you imagine a plane crash without fatalities? No, it's now part of American aviation history, understandably, and I shall show you this airplane now. It's now in a museum in America. And it's called, of course, you can see here, US Airways Flight 1549 Miracle on the Hudson. So this was the day that this miracle took place, exactly 12 years ago. How time flies. Miracle on the Hudson, it happened on this day in 2009 when this airplane pictured here crash landed on the Hudson River in New York State, New York City. Everyone survived. There were no fatalities at all. On that note, on that cheery note, on that good news that happened on this day, stories about happy days as well, for those who remember. And there were sad stories as well on this day, but overall, it was a happy day for the world. But coming up in tomorrow's Today in History, her most well-known recognizable song is Santa Baby, Santa Baby. The next one, a member of the Primates. I'm not going to go any further than that, but yeah, it does rhyme with primates, and there is a connection with primates, yes. It's a sad story. Then a lady called Helen Folashade Adu. I bet you've heard some of her songs. You may not recognize her by those names, but all will be revealed tomorrow. Also, the first woman to be elected head of state of an African country, and of course, lots more. See you tomorrow, January 16th, for another edition of Today in History. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Take care, stay safe, bye-bye.